What happens when two of late-night television's biggest names clash behind the scenes in a way that nobody saw coming? Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation between Seth Meyers and Jimmy Kimmel that ended with security escorting one host off the other's set. This isn't your typical Hollywood drama. This is a story about power, pride, and what happens when the cameras aren't rolling. The tension that had been simmering for months finally boiled over in the most spectacular way possible, creating a moment that would be talked about in entertainment circles for years to come. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, letting me know which late-night host you think handled this situation better. Because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about these television personalities. The backstory to this confrontation goes deeper than most people realize, stretching back months before that fateful night when everything exploded in front of a live studio audience. Seth Meyers had been invited to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live as part of a cross-network promotional tour, something that should have been routine for two professionals who had worked in similar circles for years. Both men had carved out their own territories in the competitive world of late-night television, but beneath the surface, professional jealousies and personal grievances had been festering like an infected wound. The problems began earlier that year when Seth had made some comments during a podcast interview that many interpreted as subtle criticisms of his fellow late-night hosts. While he never mentioned names directly, industry insiders knew exactly who he was talking about when he discussed hosts who prioritized celebrity gossip over meaningful content. Jimmy, whose show had increasingly relied on viral moments and celebrity games rather than political commentary, took these comments as a direct attack on his credibility and relevance in the current media landscape. From the moment Seth walked into the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio that evening, something felt fundamentally different from the usual pre-show atmosphere. The typical warmth and professional courtesy that characterized interactions between television personalities was noticeably absent, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that made even the most seasoned production crew members exchange worried glances. Seth, who had appeared on countless talk shows throughout his career, immediately sensed the hostile environment, but maintained his professional demeanor, hoping that whatever issues existed could be set aside for the sake of the show. Jimmy's opening monologue that night had been particularly sharp and pointed, filled with jokes that seemed designed to take not-so-subtle jabs at other late-night hosts and their approaches to comedy and current events. While he never mentioned specific names during his routine, those working in the industry immediately recognized the targeted nature of his humor. Several jokes focused on hosts who took themselves too seriously, who thought their political commentary made them more important than entertainers, and who had forgotten that their primary job was to make people laugh rather than lecture them about society's problems. Seth, waiting in the green room and watching the monologue on the monitor, felt his irritation growing with each carefully crafted insult disguised as comedy. He recognized the professional slight for what it was, an attempt to undermine his credibility and establish dominance before their on-camera interaction even began. This wasn't the behavior of a colleague showing professional courtesy. This was the action of someone looking to settle scores in the most public way possible. When it finally came time for Seth to take the stage, the studio audience welcomed him with their usual enthusiasm, completely unaware of the brewing storm between the two men or the tension that had been building throughout the evening. Jimmy's introduction was technically professional, but notably cooler than his typical guest welcomes, lacking the genuine warmth and excitement that usually characterized his interactions with fellow entertainers. There was no hearty handshake, no authentic smile, just the practiced motions of a seasoned television host going through the professional motions while harboring deeper resentments. The interview began with what appeared to be standard promotional questions about Seth's recent projects, upcoming ventures, and general career developments. However, it quickly became apparent that this would not be following the typical late-night talk show format that audiences had come to expect. Jimmy's questions carried an undercurrent of challenge and confrontation that transformed what should have been a friendly promotional appearance into something that felt more like a cross-examination designed to expose weaknesses and create conflict rather than showcase a guest's work and personality. "So, Seth," Jimmy said, settling back in his chair with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and carried an unmistakable edge of malice, "I've been watching your show lately and I have to ask, do you think comedy has gotten a little too safe these days? Too comfortable? Too worried about stepping on toes? Too concerned with being politically correct rather than just being funny?" Seth immediately recognized the loaded nature of the question and the trap that Jimmy was attempting to set. This wasn't an innocent inquiry about the state of modern comedy. This was a deliberate provocation designed to force him into a defensive position and potentially make him look foolish or out of touch in front of the audience. He shifted slightly in his seat, his media training kicking in as he attempted to navigate the dangerous conversational territory while maintaining his composure and dignity. "I think comedy evolves with the times, Jimmy," Seth responded carefully, trying to maintain a diplomatic tone while recognizing that his host was clearly spoiling for a fight. "What worked 10 years ago might not work today, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means we're adapting to our audience and the world around us, which is what good entertainers have always done throughout history." But Jimmy wasn't interested in diplomatic responses or professional courtesy. His agenda for the evening was becoming increasingly clear as he pressed forward with barely concealed aggression. "Right, but don't you think there's something to be said for pushing boundaries, for taking risks, for not worrying so much about who might get offended by a joke or a comment? I mean, when did comedy become so afraid of itself?" The studio audience was beginning to sense that something unusual was happening. What had started as a typical late-night interview was taking on the characteristics of a debate, or even an interrogation, with their host adopting an increasingly confrontational tone that made everyone present uncomfortable. Some audience members were shifting in their seats, exchanging confused glances as they tried to understand why the normally jovial atmosphere had become so tense and hostile. Seth's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his professional composure even as he recognized that Jimmy was determined to turn this into a public confrontation. "I think being thoughtful about our impact doesn't make us less funny, Jimmy. If anything, it challenges us to be more creative, to find new ways to connect with people and make them laugh without relying on outdated approaches that might have worked in a different era." "Creative," Jimmy repeated, drawing out the word with obvious disdain and mockery, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made his true feelings unmistakably clear to everyone in the studio. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks more like fear. Fear of taking risks, fear of being controversial, fear of actually being funny instead of just being safe and acceptable." The studio had fallen completely silent except for the sound of Jimmy's voice echoing through the space. Even his usually reliable band seemed uncomfortable, shifting nervously in their seats as they watched their boss cross professional lines that courtesy and respect usually kept intact. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. Seth leaned forward in his chair, his voice remaining calm and controlled but with a new edge that hadn't been present at the beginning of the interview. "You know, Jimmy, I came here tonight expecting to have a professional conversation about my work, to promote some projects, maybe share some laughs with your audience. I didn't come here to be lectured about comedy by someone who clearly has some unresolved personal and professional issues that he's decided to air in public." That comment hit Jimmy like a physical blow, and for a split second, his carefully maintained television persona cracked completely, revealing something ugly and resentful underneath the polished exterior. The mask of professional courtesy slipped away, exposing the real motivations behind his hostile behavior and confrontational approach to what should have been a routine guest appearance. Unresolved issues? Jimmy's voice cracked with indignation and wounded pride, his face beginning to flush red as his composure started to disintegrate entirely. You want to talk about issues, Seth? Let's talk about how you've spent your entire career riding the coattails of better comedians, better writers, and better shows. Let's discuss how everything you've achieved has been handed to you by people who actually deserve the credit and recognition. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the atmosphere of the studio and shocking everyone present with their venom and personal nature. This had crossed the line from professional disagreement into personal attack territory, violating every unwritten rule of television hospitality and colleague courtesy. The audience gasped audibly, many reaching for their phones despite the show's strict policies against recording, sensing that they were witnessing something historically significant and potentially career-ending. Seth's eyes widened, not in surprise at the attack itself, but in amazement that Jimmy had actually been foolish enough to voice such thoughts in public, in front of cameras, with witnesses present. His expression shifted from diplomatic politeness to cold, controlled anger, the kind of fury that comes when someone crosses a line that can never be uncrossed and opens a door that can never be closed again. "Excuse me." Seth's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace and controlled fury than if he had shouted at the top of his lungs. Every person in the studio could hear the dangerous edge in his tone, the sound of a man who had been pushed too far and was now prepared to push back with everything he had. "Did you just suggest that I've built my entire career riding other people's coattails?" Jimmy realized that he had crossed a professional and personal line that should never have been crossed. But pride, ego, and adrenaline wouldn't allow him to back down or attempt any kind of damage control. Instead of apologizing or trying to restore some semblance of professionalism to the situation, he doubled down on his attack, leaning forward across his desk like a predator preparing to deliver a killing blow to wounded prey. "You heard me perfectly, Seth," Jimmy snarled, his voice rising in volume and intensity as his control continued to slip away. "Saturday Night Live handed you opportunities. Your current show was practically gift-wrapped and delivered to you. And everything you've achieved in this industry has been the result of other people's hard work, talent, and connections. You've never had to actually earn anything through your own merit or ability." Seth stood up so abruptly that his guest chair rolled backward with enough force that it nearly tipped over completely. The sudden movement so unexpected and dramatic that Jimmy's security team, stationed just off camera in the wings, immediately stepped forward with hands on their radios, unsure whether they were witnessing a heated professional argument or something that might escalate into physical confrontation requiring intervention. "You want to have this conversation here, Jimmy? Right now, in front of your audience, on your own show?" Seth's voice remained steady and controlled, but everyone in the studio could hear the barely contained rage bubbling beneath the surface, ready to explode at any moment. "Because if that's what you really want, I have quite a few things to say about coattails, about who's really been riding them, and about the kind of host who attacks his guests instead of entertaining his audience." Jimmy shot up from behind his desk with such force that his coffee mug rattled and papers scattered, his face now completely flushed red with embarrassment, anger, and the dawning realization that he had made a terrible mistake that was being broadcast live to millions of viewers. Spittle had begun forming at the corners of his mouth as his composure disintegrated entirely in front of everyone present. "Bring it on, Meyers!" Jimmy shouted, his voice cracking with emotion and wounded pride. "Let's see what you've really got when you don't have an entire team of writers feeding you every single line, when you can't hide behind prepared material and carefully crafted jokes written by other people." "You mean like right now?" Seth shot back with devastating calm and precision, gesturing around the chaotic studio with theatrical flourish. "Because last time I checked, you're the one standing next to cue cards, teleprompters, and an entire production team whose only job is making sure you don't completely embarrass yourself on national television every single night of the week." The Band had stopped playing entirely, their instruments falling silent as they watched their employer engaged in what was rapidly becoming a complete professional meltdown and public relations disaster. The audience members were no longer sitting quietly in their seats, many standing up to get a better view of the unprecedented carnage unfolding before their eyes, while others were whispering among themselves about what they were witnessing. Jimmy walked around his desk with determined steps, closing the physical distance between himself and Seth until they were standing face to face in the center of the stage, close enough that their heated words were creating a dangerous atmosphere of potential violence that had everyone in the studio on edge and ready for anything to happen next. "You think you're better than me?" Jimmy demanded, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "You think your sanctimonious political commentary and your holier-than-thou attitude makes you some kind of serious journalist or important cultural figure, instead of just another entertainer trying to stay relevant. I think I'm honest about what I do and who I am," Seth replied without backing down even an inch, maintaining his ground and his dignity even as the situation spiraled completely out of control around them. "I don't pretend to be the everyman while sitting in a multi-million-dollar mansion, counting money from corporate sponsors who essentially buy my silence and complicity on issues that actually matter to real people." That response hit Jimmy like a devastating physical blow to his carefully constructed public image. His entire brand and television persona was built on being relatable and accessible, on positioning himself as the regular guy next door who just happened to have stumbled into a television career. To have that facade called out so directly and brutally, in front of his own carefully cultivated audience, was absolutely devastating to everything he had worked to build. "At least I don't hide behind fake intellectual superiority and pretend that my jokes matter more than anyone else's," Jimmy snarled back, poking his finger dangerously close to Seth's chest in a gesture that could easily be interpreted as threatening. "Physical contact?" "No," Seth replied with crushing calm and devastating precision. "You just pretend that your jokes matter at all." The studio audience erupted into complete chaos. Some people were cheering and applauding Seth's response. Others were booing and expressing their disapproval, and many were simply shocked into stunned silence by the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing unfold in real time before their eyes. Jimmy's producer was frantically gesturing from the wings, desperately trying to signal for an immediate commercial break to stop the disaster that was being broadcast live. But Jimmy was too far gone in his emotional breakdown to notice or care about anything except the man standing in front of him, who had just publicly humiliated him in the worst possible way imaginable. "Get out of my studio right now," Jimmy said, his entire body shaking with barely controlled rage and wounded pride. "I want you off my set immediately." Seth smiled, but there was absolutely no warmth or friendliness in the expression, only cold satisfaction at having exposed Jimmy's true character in front of everyone present. "With pleasure, Jimmy. But just so we're completely clear about this situation, our conversation isn't over by any stretch of the imagination. Not by a long shot." As Seth turned to leave with his dignity intact, Jimmy made his final, fatal mistake that would define how this entire incident would be remembered and discussed for years to come. "Security!" he shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing through the studio and creating a moment that would live in television, infamy forever. The moment those words left Jimmy's mouth, the entire dynamic shifted from a professional dispute between colleagues to something far more serious and potentially dangerous. Seth stopped dead in his tracks, slowly turning back to face Jimmy with an expression of pure disbelief, mixed with calculated fury that made everyone present understand that something irreversible had just occurred. Two security guards emerged from the wings reluctantly, their faces showing clear hesitation and unwillingness to get involved in what was obviously a situation way above their normal responsibilities and pay grade. They approached slowly with hands raised in a peaceful, placating manner, clearly hoping to de-escalate the situation, rather than being forced to physically remove a fellow television personality and industry colleague. Seth looked directly into one of the still-rolling cameras and spoke with perfect clarity to the viewing audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here tonight to have a friendly conversation and promote my work. Instead, I've been personally attacked and now threatened by someone with serious issues. I'm leaving now because I choose to maintain my dignity." He turned back to Jimmy one final time. "I hope you get the help you clearly need." With that, Seth walked calmly toward the exit, leaving behind a destroyed studio, a humiliated host, and one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. So there you have it, the complete story of the night Seth Meyers got kicked off Jimmy Kimmel's show after an explosive confrontation that changed everything. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible behind-the-scenes stories and comment below with your thoughts on who was really in the wrong here.